Hello everyone, welcome back to the series of videos where I talk about the basics of supply chain management. In the previous video, we talked about how do you define a supply chain? What is a supply chain, and what do you mean when you say you optimize a supply chain? Now, in this video, we're going to talk about how you view a supply chain. What are the process views of a supply chain? What are the different ways you can look at it, and why each of those methods of viewing the supply chain is useful, right? So, well, let's get into it. The two ways of viewing a supply chain are the cycle view and the push-pull view. And each of these methods of viewing the supply chain is useful. Now, in the future, whenever I talk about stages in a supply chain, remember that one stage can be a single company, or multiple stages within a supply chain could be within the same company. So whenever I talk about stages in a supply chain, you could think of them as companies, but they might also be multiple stages within the same company. So when you look at a cycle view, you are talking about the different processes that are used within a particular company. So the different processes that are done within a supply chain and how you look at them as a series of cycles, right? And in a push-pull view of supply chain, what we're going to do is we're going to look at the different stages in the supply chain, and we are going to categorize them as push processes and pull processes, and we will, well, take it from there. Right? So a cycle view of supply chain looks something like this. So if you take a simple supply chain where you have a supplier who supplies to a manufacturer, who supplies to a distributor, who then supplies to a retailer, and then the retailer supplies to a customer. If you look at a simple supply chain like this, you'll notice that the customer is part of the customer order replenishment cycle, that the customer goes. And so if you look at business to business transactions, a customer might place an order, say, every week or every 2 weeks or every month or every year or every 6 months or on some particular cycle, right? So if you're looking at customer orders as a part of a cycle, then the retailer and the customer are part of the customer order cycle. The distributor and the retailer are part of the replenishment cycle, and the manufacturer and distributor are part of the manufacturing cycle, and finally the supplier and manufacturer are part of the procurement cycle. So except for the customer and the first supplier, every other company or every other stage is part of multiple cycles. So they have to keep track of their suppliers and keep track of their customers, right? While the customer doesn't have to keep track of anything, the supplier has to just keep track of their customer. They don't have any supplier before that, right? So you can look at them as cycles because these cycles happen they can happen on a regular basis, or they can be irregular also, but this view of a supply chain is useful when you tend to have more regular cycles, right? But this doesn't give you an idea of this doesn't give you an idea of how the customer places their order, right? So sometimes when customers place their orders, they don't place orders just for finished products. They might place orders intermediately in an intermediate stage where the final product can come to them, say 6 months later or a year later. So think of getting your house built, or think of buying a apartment that has just started getting built. You might put down a deposit, you might hold a particular product there, but you will not actually take charge of the house or the apartment till, say, 6 months or a year into the future. So you're not at the beginning, at the end of the cycle, right? So when you have different ways in which customer orders can be placed, the cycle view is not as useful. But cycle view is you should always have the cycle view in the back of the mind. The other way of looking at supply chain is called the push-pull view, where you classify some companies as pull companies and some stages as pull stages and some stages as push stages. So pull stages are the stages that are initiated in response to a customer order, while push stages are stages that are initiated in anticipation of a customer order. Now, you might have supply chains where there are no pull stages at all. They might all be push stages. Or you might also have the opposite supply chain where all stages are pull stages, where nothing is done until a customer actually places an order. And this is usually true for like custom stuff, right? So even in that case, so sometimes there are a few things that are still push or pull in each of these cases, but let's look at an example, right? So a simple example that we can look at, say, for a push product is, let's say you go to Macy's and you buy a t-shirt. Now, Macy's bought that t-shirt from their supplier, who from their distributor, who then got it from the manufacturer, who then got materials from their supplier, and so on and so on. So it's most of the supply chain exists before you as a customer went and bought that product, right? So the only part of the supply chain that can exist after you buy the product is you might return the product, in which case Macy's becomes part of the supply chain again, or once you're done wearing that t-shirt, once the t-shirt is torn or you're not going to wear it anymore, you might say take it to a recycling center, in which case a recycling center now becomes part of the supply chain, right? Except for that one stage, much of the supply chain exists before you placed that order. So all of the companies there are push companies. They're all making these products in anticipation of customer demand, as opposed to say, take an example of, say, custom furniture. So the textbook has Ethan Allen as the example. So if you look at Ethan Allen, the only thing Ethan Allen has essentially is they have raw materials that are available. So they might have some wood, they might have some paint, they might have some fabric that they have bought because they have this replenishment cycle that they have done with their supplier. So that is all they have. So once you go, you place an order for this custom piece of furniture, that is when the rest of the supply chain gets into motion. Then even things like different pieces of wood or different type of wood might be purchased after that. Right? Different paints can be purchased after that. So everything that goes into manufacturing that custom piece of furniture comes afterwards. So first the customer order and then the manufacture, right? So these are all, this is an example of a completely pull sort of supply chain. And here is what a push-pull supply chain looks like. So wherever the customer order arrives, that is called the push-pull boundary. All processes before that are push processes because they're all working in anticipation of customer demand, and everything after the customer order is a pull process because that's happening post customer demand, right? And here is two examples. So if you look at something like LL Bean, right? So the only thing that happens after the pull process is the customer order replenishment. So you might come back to LL Bean to buy more stuff because you like what you bought from them, but everything else, the manufacturing, procurement, and all the other cycles happen before the customer order arrives. Right, as opposed to Ethan Allen, where most of the supply chain is the pull process. The only thing that has been accomplished is the procurement cycle. Right now, so now that we know the different ways of looking at the different views of supply chain, now how do these different stages or these different cycles within a supply chain, how do they talk to each other, right? And if multiple stages are within the same company, how do these different stages talk to each other, right? And the way you look at it is you look at some macro processes within supply chains where information transfer can take place. And there are three different ways in which information transfer can take place. You have customer relationship management, where a company is managing its relationship with its customers. You have supplier relationship management, where you're managing relationship with your supplier, and also the internal supply chain management, right? So these are the three different macro processes of supply chain. So when you look at the supplier relationship management, when you talk to your supplier, you are talking about what you can source, you're negotiating with them, you're buying stuff from them, you are maybe doing some design collaboration because you want a specific type of item and so on. So that is all part of the supplier relationship management. With your customer, you're looking at, well, what kind of markets you have, what kind of price are you going to set for your customer, what you're going to sell, then post selling items to them. Maybe you're looking at service. So you're looking at call center management, some order management, and all of that. All of that is part of supplier customer relationship management. And finally, within the firm itself, if there are multiple stages within the firm, different stages also have to talk to each other. And remember, all of this that you see here on the slide, they're all information exchange processes. So strategic planning, demand planning, fulfillment, field service, this is all information exchange processes, right? And these are all the macro processes within the supply chain. Now, I'm going to end this video here. In the next video, we're going to talk about decision phases in a supply chain. What are the different decision phases? How often do you make each of these decisions, and so on? And so I will see you all in the next video. And if you have any questions, feel free to email me. All right. Take care.